Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Dr. Eric Voss. I'm a satellite communications technician with a background in astrophysics and systems engineering. I've worked on projects for both NASA and ESA, but nothing. And all my years of training prepared me for what I witnessed from orbit. As of Sol 178 aboard the International Space Station, I can confirm that Earth has gone dark. I don't say that lightly, not in a poetic sense, I mean that literally. From 400 kilometers above the planet's surface, I watched one city after another, New York, London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, wink out. No grid failure, no solar flare, no meteor strike. One moment, the lights of civilization gleamed like a constellation of life, and the next, they flickered and vanished like candles in a storm. But let me back up. I arrived aboard the ISS as part of Expedition 72, launched via a Falcon 9 from Kennedy Space Center in early March. Alongside me were Commander Yuki Tanaka from JAXA, biomedical scientist Dr. Sarah Mbai from ESA, mission specialist Lieutenant Roman Alvarez from the U.S. Space Force, and systems engineer Viktor Dubrovsky from Roscosmos. We were a multi-agency team, as diverse in our expertise as we were in nationality. And until a few weeks ago, our mission had been progressing flawlessly. We were tasked with deploying and maintaining a new satellite array to enhance low Earth orbit communications and monitor surface-based AI satellite interlink hubs, some of the most advanced civilian-military hybrid tech ever deployed. The irony now? That array may have been the first to pick up signs that something was going terribly wrong down below. It began subtly. Around Sol 158, ground control in Houston began missing check-ins. Nothing unusual at first. Comm blackouts aren't unheard of. Solar interference, uplink calibration delays, even simple human error. But then it started happening consistently. Then it wasn't just Houston. Toulouse, Tokyo, Baikonur, Canberra, station after station went silent. All our usual ground-to-orbit relays stopped returning pings within 48 hours. That's when we knew something was off. Commander Tanaka tried rerouting our signal through backup channels. Roman manually adjusted the Ku-band antenna array for a direct Earth downlink. I dug into the telemetry logs. There was no trace of system error. Everything worked perfectly on our end. The problem was Earth. At first, we assumed it was a cyber attack. Sarah floated the idea that maybe a coordinated blackout was being enforced globally, possibly during a major geopolitical escalation. Victor wasn't convinced. Even during worst Cold War, we don't shut down space, he said. We call, even if to curse each other. We began to suspect something bigger, but the real horror began the first night we looked down and saw New York dark. You don't forget what a planet looks like at night. The Earth is beautiful in darkness, a sea of deep blue, streaked by lightning storms, with whole continents outlined in constellations of light. New York is a crown jewel, visible from orbit by its sheer brightness. But that night, it was gone. I stared at the viewport for hours, watching the eastern seaboard fade. A section at a time, first Jersey, then Long Island, then the boroughs. As if someone had flipped a switch street by street, and then it wasn't just New York. Boston was out. Then D.C. the grid loss moved with terrifying coordination. Sarah asked aloud, "Do you think it's a power cascade, a domino effect?" Roman shook his head. That's not how the grid fails. These look like selective blackouts. Strategic. Days passed. We monitored every pass. We had orbital windows over Europe, South America, Asia. Cities dimmed one by one. Sao Paulo, Istanbul, London. All out, the northern hemisphere was dying, and fast. And then the bodies appeared. The station was equipped with Earth-facing optical telescopes and cameras for observation and high-altitude imaging. During a polar pass over Ukraine, Victor spotted movement near a city he recognized. Dnipro. Not trucks or cars, masses of people, huge clusters moving through streets, but not evacuating, not fleeing, converging. We pulled every imaging channel we could, infrared, low-light, thermal. What we saw made no sense. These weren't organized columns. They were chaotic, violent, and frenzied. People attacking each other. Streets littered with collapsed forms. Fires with no one putting them out. Roads choked with abandoned vehicles. Then Sarah pointed something out. Why aren't there helicopters? Or sirens? No aerial response. No emergency crews. We looked closer. Government buildings were dark. Airports were shut down. Control towers empty. From space, we had the best seat in the world to witness the fall of civilization. And yet we couldn't do anything about it. Not until we received the first transmission. It came on a frequency none of us were monitoring. 7.030 megahertz. A weak ham radio signal. Faint and scratchy, barely cutting through the cosmic noise. Victor was the one who tuned it in properly. A male voice, American accent. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Static drowned most of it, but the message was clear. ISS, if you're still up there, do not come down. Earth is lost. They're not sick, they're gone. They're things now. They don't die. I repeat, do not come back. Your capsule might be infected. I saw it land. Then static. That was 3 days ago. We haven't heard anything since, not from the ham operator. Not from any government. The Earth is still turning, but the lights are gone. No radio chatter, no satellite pings. No emergency beacons. Just silence. Except the automated resupply capsule, CRS-31, launched weeks ago and is still on course. Uncrewed, supposedly, packed with fuel, rations, oxygen tanks, experiments, and some spare EVA suits. It was scheduled to dock autonomously, but after the message from the radio operator, we checked its telemetry. Something was wrong. The capsule's descent trajectory had changed slightly during atmospheric entry. According to its logs, it had conducted an unscheduled suborbital skip maneuver, likely due to anomalous drag. But its external cameras showed damage. Burn marks. Deep gouges on the hatch, as if something tried to get out. It landed somewhere near the Utah test and training range, near Dugway. Normally, the capsule would be retrieved by recovery teams and shipped back up, or its contents would be sent to us aboard the next launch. But there was no next launch. So imagine our surprise when 2 days ago a proximity alert went off in Node 2. The resupply capsule was approaching. On its own. No tug, no scheduled launch logs, no authorization codes. And yet, its guidance system was online. It had maneuvered into a matching orbit. Docking sequence initiated. Now we face a choice: let it dock and risk contamination, or override the system and jettison it into deep orbit, lose our remaining supplies, potentially seal ourselves in a tomb with dwindling oxygen, food, and fuel. As I record this log, Commander Tanaka is running simulations for manual override. Roman is posted in the airlock with an EVA kit ready. Sarah is preparing the bio-isolation chamber in case something breaches containment. I'm watching Earth spin below us. It's blue, beautiful, quiet, and completely alone. Whatever happened down there, it wasn't a war. It wasn't a virus in the traditional sense. It moved too fast. The infected don't behave like people. They move with purpose but no coordination. Like predators with one instinct, spread. I've studied enough fluid dynamics and swarm behavior to know when something isn't random. From orbit, we could watch how major population centers fell within hours, not days. The movement patterns across highways, through suburban sprawl, even across open terrain. They were chaotic only at first glance. When we overlaid data from successive passes, something became clear. The infected weren't scattering. They were expanding, like a chemical reaction. A chain detonation consuming urban nodes and then spreading outward in a fractal pattern. At first, we assumed this thing was biological, maybe engineered, maybe natural. A pathogen of some sort. But the speed of transition from uninfected to violent, frenzied attacker. It didn't match anything in known virology. No fever curve, no dormancy, no incubation. One moment they were human. The next, they weren't. We saw footage, brief clips scraped from downlinked surveillance satellites and patchy news feeds, of people convulsing mid-step, eyes dilating, pupils vanishing, followed by violent outbursts against bystanders. The response time was measured in seconds, not hours. We tried debating the ethics of it, whether we were dealing with the infected or the dead, whether this was a neurochemical hijacking or something more terminal. But after a few days, the debate didn't matter anymore, because the only question left was how long we could survive up here with no one left to send us home. CRS-31 changed everything. It initiated its own approach, somehow. The main docking port on Node 2 began to receive handshake signals from the capsule's flight computer. That's not supposed to happen without active ground control authorization. The capsule had no business initiating final burn sequences or attempting to align its grapple ring with the PMA, pressurized mating adapter. But there it was, 80 meters out, closing in at a crawl. Roman and Tanaka suited up and floated to the cupola for visual confirmation. I stayed with Victor and Destiny, monitoring the telemetry while Sarah ran simulations on isolation protocols. There was still a chance it was a misfire. Faulty programming. Maybe something in the capsule's firmware got corrupted during re-entry and was running on old docking scripts. But then we saw the scorch marks on its hull. Not just re-entry burns. Deep carbon scoring near the hatch latch, the kind you'd expect from impact or prying. The kind of marks you'd get if something inside was trying to claw its way out. Commander Tanaka issued an internal lockdown order. We closed all hatches leading to Node 2 and disabled the auto-latch circuit on the common berthing mechanism. That should have been enough to keep CRS-31 from completing hard dock. We even vented a tiny amount of pressure from the adapter rim to unbalance the vacuum seal. But the capsule still drifted closer, thrusters firing in short, precise bursts. "How is it guiding itself?" Victor muttered. He wasn't asking anyone in particular. The capsule was uncrewed. Its onboard computer had limited capacity for autonomous maneuvers. Most of the decision-making happened during launch or descent, not during orbital docking. It left us with a chilling possibility. Someone, or something, was guiding it manually. When it came within 30 meters, we killed the exterior power feed to the Node 2 port and sent a signal burst to corrupt its handshake protocol. The capsule stalled, hung in orbit, dead in the water. But it didn't drift away. It just remained there, hovering silently. We spent the next 6 hours monitoring every system on board. No change in thermal signature. No pressure differential in the hull, no sign of motion. It was as if it had shut itself down, waiting. Sarah pulled me aside in Lab Module Kibo and showed me something that made my skin crawl. She had rerouted one of the station's forward-facing external cameras and magnified a frame of the capsule's hatch rim. At first, it looked like surface damage, but when she overlaid the previous capsule's arrival frames from last mission, we saw indentations, fingertip marks. Human. Dug deep into the reinforced carbon composite. Not tool scratches. Not pressure deformation. Claw marks. Something was trying to get out, she whispered. Tanaka refused to open communications with the capsule. Official procedure called for immediate quarantine if contamination was suspected, and our commander wasn't about to violate it. Roman argued for using the Canadarm2 to push the capsule into a decaying orbit and let it burn up over the Pacific. I agreed. We had 3 EVA suits, a full MMU pack, and remote arm control from within Unity. It would be risky, but it was doable. The plan lasted less than a day. At 3:17 UTC the next morning, motion sensors on the capsule registered a faint vibration. It was subtle, microscale movements, but rhythmic, as if something inside was pacing. Then the station's internal alert system triggered a proximity alarm. Someone had activated the secondary maneuvering jets on CRS-31. We had already disabled its primary docking feed, so it was using backup systems. We ran for the viewing port. The capsule was inching sideways, rotating. Not docking, aligning itself with the airlock manually. That shouldn't have been possible. Maybe the internal AI is repurposing subsystems, Sarah said, her voice tight. Could be responding to heat signatures, life form proximity. Or it's being guided, Tanaka answered, by something on board. We initiated an emergency power isolation to the docking port, hoping to fry any remaining comm links. The lights on the capsule flickered, then died. It spun slowly, drifting back to a hold position. Again, it waited. And then we received a second radio transmission. This time, on 7.045 megahertz. Stronger than before, same voice. I told you not to let it dock. If it gets aboard, you won't survive. We tracked it from Dugway. They thought it was clear, but it wasn't. It's not about infection anymore, it's about replication. Once it's in a pressurized environment, it grows. It rebuilds. Please. If you're still alive up there, destroy it. Don't bring it back. There was more static this time, but we managed to trace the source, somewhere near Nevada. The signal bounced off multiple atmospheric layers, but Victor pinpointed the transmission origin to a mountainous region outside of Ely. Sarah found an old facility on Google Maps cached in the onboard server. An old Cold War radar array, decommissioned but structurally intact. Probably repurposed by survivalists. Maybe this man was a former operator or military tech, but whoever he was, he knew more than we did. He knew what had come back with the capsule. We made our decision that night. Roman would suit up. He had logged the most EVA hours of anyone on station. Tanaka and I would monitor from internal control, while Victor and Sarah coordinated trajectory and kept station balance stable. The plan was simple. Use the Canadarm2 to grab the capsule and push it into a new orbit that would degrade naturally. Then cut it loose and let it burn. Roman stepped out into darkness just before the sunrise over the Atlantic. He maneuvered slowly, moving along the truss to reach the remote manipulator system. I watched him float there, just a speck of human life against the void, while the world below spun in silence. The arm latched onto the capsule successfully. Its surface looked charred and bent in several places. Roman's helmet cam flickered as he passed near the hatch, then froze. He said nothing. "Roman, status check," Tanaka called. "Do you see anything unusual?" Silence. Then Roman spoke, voice flat, almost mechanical. I think it's moving inside." The transmission cut out. Then the capsule's lights came back on. Not in a flicker, all at once, as if it had decided to wake up. We initiated an immediate recall on Roman's tether, but the line went slack. His comms were dead. External cams showed his body floating slowly, disconnected from the Canadarm, drifting toward the edge of our visual field. I yelled into the mic. Nothing. He was gone. The capsule twitched, literally twitched, as if something inside shifted its center of gravity. The manipulator arm buckled slightly. Tanaka didn't wait. She punched in the manual jettison sequence. The arm released. The capsule floated away, inert again. No thrust, no spin, just a dead piece of metal gliding into the void. But we all saw it. Just before it vanished from camera range, the external thermal sensor caught it. One faint heat signature, human-shaped, pressed against the inside of the porthole, watching us. I stared at that image for hours, replaying the final frames from the thermal feed. The silhouette was unmistakably human. Torso upright, head tilted slightly, one palm braced against the inside of the observation window. The fingers weren't relaxed. They were splayed, tense, as if straining toward the glass, no motion. Just a quiet, burning presence captured in a single infrared still. We never saw Roman again. His suit beacon continued to transmit for another 2 orbits before drifting into the Earth's shadow permanently. We debated using the station's RCS thrusters to adjust trajectory and intercept his path, but even Victor, stoic, analytical Victor, had already accepted the reality. If Roman had survived, he'd have activated his backup oxygen module or used his MMU pack to drift back toward the airlock. Instead, we received only silence. His comms were flatlined. Telemetry dead. A man-shaped void slowly slipping into the atmosphere where it would eventually burn up like a meteorite and vanish without a trace. We held a moment of silence for him. Not because it would change anything, but because it felt necessary. For ourselves. For the fragility of it all. For the weight of watching someone you know get erased against the backdrop of Earth's slow death spiral. The silence that followed his disappearance was a new kind of quiet. Heavy, invasive, and constant. The capsule, CRS-31, was now gone, expelled into a degrading orbit. Unless it had a way to correct itself, it would skip into the atmosphere within 36 hours and burn up on re-entry. If there was something inside, and if it was still functioning, or alive, it would be incinerated before it could reach the surface again. At least, that's what we told ourselves. But then came the question that none of us wanted to say aloud. What if it wasn't the only one? I went back through the launch manifests on the onboard server, scanning every outbound payload sent to orbit in the last 90 days. There had been 7 launches, not including CRS-31. Most were routine. Starlink deployments, CubeSat constellations, a few classified defense payloads. But one stood out, designated STS Biosentinel-2, a biological sample capsule launched jointly by NASA and a private contractor. It had been designed to study cellular decay in vacuum conditions, with long-term microgravity exposure and gene therapy experiments. Its last tracked orbit placed it well below us, around 280 km/h, but it hadn't pinged any ground stations in over 2 weeks. Its beacon was silent, and it had been launched from Vandenberg just days before the lights went out in California. Sarah took one look at the capsule specs and her face paled. The contractor involved had a history of experimenting with adaptive cell regeneration. Not illegal work, but definitely ethically gray. She found a cached paper published by one of their research teams on viral-based DNA repair systems using retroactive RNA editors, basically self-correcting gene therapy vectors that could rewire living tissue under stress. "What if someone on the ground used it?" she asked. "What if they deployed it early, during a field test, and whatever was inside mutated?" Tanaka didn't reply. She'd simply stared out the cupola window at the dark surface below, hands folded behind her back. Victor was less reserved. No responsible team would deploy something like that without containment. "Wouldn't they?" I asked, opening a feed from the archived live stream of the test capsule's launch. The first few minutes were clean, but at T plus 112 seconds, the second stage had flickered briefly. Some onboard error had required an emergency suborbital boost. The capsule had skipped the upper thermosphere, clipped the edge of the atmosphere, then returned to orbit, its heat shielding damaged. "What if it was compromised?" I said. "What if whatever was inside adapted to vacuum?" Nobody had a good answer for that. The idea of a biological contaminant surviving space exposure was already improbable. But if it was engineered, if it had a synthetic origin, then assumptions about survivability, behavior, and limitations might no longer apply. We started checking for other objects near us. The ISS is constantly monitored for space debris, micrometeorites, and satellites. We have NASA's debris risk management system uploaded in our flight software, though it hasn't been updated in weeks. But one listing caught my eye. Object designation, ELUC 9R, originally tagged as debris from a defunct CubeSat cluster launched over the Indian Ocean. Expected to have fully deorbited weeks ago, but the last recorded trajectory placed it within 80 kilometers of us. Its velocity was inconsistent with standard orbital decay. It was accelerating slightly, then decelerating. Unpowered objects don't do that. "Could it be autonomous?" I asked Victor. He ran simulations through the station's tracking interface. Whatever Look 9R was, it wasn't tumbling like a dead satellite. It was holding orientation, slowly adjusting course, as if something on board was piloting or influencing its movement. We submitted a kill command to the onboard uplink antenna, broadcasting across all frequencies with known handshake protocols. No response. The object maintained heading. We were being followed. At this point, fear began to settle not as a reaction, but as a daily constant. We were trapped in a tin can 400 kilometers above the surface of a planet we could no longer recognize. There were no more broadcasts, no rescue missions, no contingency plan. The people on the ground were gone or something else. And now space wasn't empty anymore. That night, Sarah dreamed of shadows moving outside the solar panels. She said she heard scraping against the hull in her sleep. I wanted to laugh, to call it stress, but the next morning, the external mic sensor on the Tranquility module recorded something. Not metal on metal, not space debris. Rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. At first, we assumed it was internal. Air vent resonance, fuel pressure equalizing in one of the tanks, but the pattern repeated again exactly 4 minutes later. We rerouted all external camera feeds and initiated a slow pan across the starboard hull. There was nothing there. Then we spotted the shadow. Not cast by a person, but by something clinging to the solar array mast, low profile, pressed flat against the structure. No lights, no suit, just a faint outline. Too big to be debris, too still to be a bird or piece of fabric. It moved. Only slightly, just a reposition of limbs. 4 of them, maybe 5. Something biological, yet wrong. Elongated. Adapted for vacuum. Sarah dropped the tablet she was holding and backed away. "That's not from the capsule," she whispered. "That is the capsule." If CRS-31 had carried something aboard, or if it had been intercepted during its return, then what we jettisoned may not have been the whole threat. If this thing, this presence, had survived, evolved, or replicated, then it may have latched onto the station without us ever knowing. We sealed off all external hatches. Victor reinforced the emergency bulkheads and shut down the hatch cycling controls in Unity and Quest. We vented nitrogen through the exterior vents, hoping to freeze or destabilize anything on the surface. But by then it was too late. Tanaka noticed the drop in oxygen pressure in one of the tanks, a slow leak internal to the closed system. That shouldn't have been possible unless there had been damage to the regulation valve. Roman's final EVA had passed directly over it. We checked the internal camera feed. Nothing. Then the lights flickered. Just a single module, Zvezda, but enough to confirm our worst fear. Power draw was being rerouted. We pulled the diagnostic logs. One internal hatch had opened. No one had touched it. It hadn't been scheduled or authorized. The system showed a manual override. An emergency lever pulled from inside the Quest airlock. And Quest had been closed for days. The module was dark, silent. The kind of silence you could feel in your throat, like pressure underwater. Victor grabbed the emergency containment breather and moved toward the corridor. I followed with a pressurized seal bag. Sarah stayed with the diagnostics. Tanaka armed herself with the one weapon we had aboard, a pneumatic bolt gun used for maintenance anchoring during EVAs. It wasn't designed for combat, but it could punch through sheet steel at close range. The four of us moved as one, slow and deliberate, each breath shallow as we approached the Quest airlock. The porthole in the inner hatch was already fogged over, obscured by a spreading layer of condensation. It made no sense. Humidity was tightly controlled aboard the ISS, and that part of the station had been sealed for days. We were well past coincidence. The hatch was ajar, just enough for the autolock mechanism to register a failure. Red status lights glowed weakly around the frame. I could feel the slight shift in air pressure, like the space beyond was warmer. Victor handed me a thermal probe, and I extended it past the hatch. The readout spiked. Whatever was inside Quest was generating heat, a lot of it. Far more than any human body should in that configuration. Not a person. Not anymore. Tanaka moved first. She gave us a nod and stepped forward, bolt gun raised. I followed close behind with the seal bag open, ready to deploy the emergency wrap if anything breached containment. Victor flanked us, his left arm cradling the breather, the other gripping a utility cutter. Inside, the module was dim. Emergency lights only. The interior was cluttered, nothing out of place at first glance, until I saw the trail. It was faint, but unmistakable. A smear of some fluid, not blood exactly, more translucent and viscous, dragged along the inside edge of the wall. It wound between the EVA suit lockers and across the Velcro-strapped panels. Something had moved here. Crawled, maybe. The marks were inconsistent with a bipedal gait. They were too wide, too low. Something that slithered or dragged itself with limbs that weren't meant to hold weight. Tanaka signaled us to stop. She pointed to the leftmost suit locker. The handle was cracked, the seal partially breached. It was moving, just slightly, as if something inside was shifting its weight. The suit inside had belonged to Roman. I swallowed hard, then keyed my comm mic. "Roman," I said, knowing full well I wouldn't hear a response. "If you're in there, say something." There was a sound, but it wasn't a voice. It was a wet, congested rasp, like breath struggling through a collapsed lung. Gurgled and irregular, a sound I knew didn't belong to any living astronaut. Tanaka didn't wait, she fired. The bolt gun cracked with a deafening pop as the steel spike punched through the locker door and into the contents within. A shriek followed. A horrifying, bestial wail that didn't sound human in origin. The locker door buckled outward, the metal warping as something inside began to thrash violently. I could see a shape now. Larger than it should have been, arms too long, bones shifting beneath fabric. The face, when it pressed against the crack in the door, was all wrong. It had Roman's jawline, Roman's eyes, but there was no one behind them. The pupils were blown, milky white, mouth distorted and open wide, full of broken teeth as if the jaw had unhinged. Tanaka fired again. The bolt struck center mass this time, blasting through the torso with a wet snap. The thing inside howled and burst forward, breaking the locker open as it lunged. It didn't move like a person anymore. It moved like something built in the shape of a man, but puppeted by something else entirely. Muscles jerked with the wrong rhythm. Its fingers were fused together with stretched skin, arms swinging like whips as it hurled itself across the narrow module. Victor reacted quickly, jamming the containment breather between us and the thing. It collided with the device, hissing violently as the pressure released, and a burst of frozen nitrogen gas enveloped the module. The temperature dropped in seconds. The creature writhed, screeching through a half-frozen throat as its limbs stiffened. It twisted in pain, still trying to crawl. Tanaka fired one last bolt into the head. This time, it stopped moving. We secured the airlock, ran full-cycle decontamination, and sealed the remains in an isolation container lined with carbon mesh. Whatever had reanimated Roman's body wasn't just residual infection. It had adapted to vacuum, possibly even mutated in microgravity. The suit had been intact. There were no breach alarms. That meant it had gotten in some other way. We were no longer looking at infection in the traditional sense. This was transformation. Controlled, engineered. Sarah pulled a tissue sample through a bioport and began running gene mapping with the limited molecular analysis gear we had. What she found chilled us all. The DNA had markers that weren't human, not even terrestrial. Gene sequences matched no known virus, bacterium, or organism. There were chain repetitions, synthetic loops, and protein bonding that looked like someone had spliced CRISPR-edited DNA into stem cells and let them evolve unchecked. It was constantly rewriting itself, even in stasis. No wonder it survived. No wonder it thrived. Then she said something I'll never forget. This isn't mutation, it's design. Someone had built this. And now we had to ask who. That answer came, as always, from the void. The third signal arrived on a completely new frequency, 5.395 megahertz, encoded in what sounded like Morse. Victor translated it. Stay in orbit. Project Black key released. Do not descend. Contamination global. Ground access denied. Initiate final protocol. It was followed by GPS coordinates located near McMurdo Station, Antarctica. We pulled every satellite image we could from the polar region. The base was dark. No movement, no power. But 50 kilometers inland, we spotted something unusual. A geometric excavation site. Hexagonal structure, artificial. Built deep into the ice shelf, and according to our data, never registered with the Antarctic Treaty System. Project Black Key, Sarah muttered. It's not a pathogen, it's a key to something buried. The implications were staggering. Maybe this was never a virus. Maybe it was an engineered organism designed to activate or unlock something ancient. If someone had found it beneath the ice and tried to interface with it, perhaps what we were seeing wasn't the result of infection, but awakening. Either way, Earth was lost, and we couldn't go back. With the station's orbit slowly degrading and supplies dwindling, we had only one option left. Survival in orbit was unsustainable, but full descent would guarantee contamination. So we made a plan, a final broadcast. We reconfigured the high-gain antenna, aligned the remaining satellites in Earth's shadow, and transmitted everything. Sarah's research logs, Tanaka's visual feeds, Victor's flight records, and every second of footage we'd collected. The full story, compressed and encoded into a repeating data loop, aimed at every deep space listening post and dormant probe from here to the heliopause. We didn't know if anyone would hear it, or if anyone was left. But someone, somewhere, needed to know what had happened. We initiated deorbit procedures for one of the Soyuz return capsules. Not for us, for the container, the one that held what remained of Roman. We loaded it with thermal explosives, timed precisely to detonate on atmospheric interface. The risk was enormous, but the alternative, letting it drift uncontrolled, was worse. We had to ensure nothing made it back to the surface. It launched smoothly, disappeared into the dark. And then we were 4. The days that followed blurred. Time aboard the station isn't marked by sunlight but by alarms, burns, sensor pings. Earth spun below us, beautiful and broken. The aurora still danced above the poles. Thunderheads still rolled across the equator. From up here the planet looked alive. But we knew better. On Sol 198 we lost contact with the last operational satellite array. Our connection to the amateur ham operator in Nevada was gone. His voice, once crackling through the dark, fell silent. By Sol 203, our oxygen recyclers began to degrade. And on Sol 206, Tanaka made the final call. We would not return to Earth. Instead, we used the remaining RCS fuel to raise orbit, just slightly. Enough to stabilize for another few weeks. We moved the station into passive power mode, rerouted energy into critical systems only, and shut down everything non-essential. We were no longer astronauts, we were archivists, witnesses. And now, I write this, recording it through the station's internal logging system, repeating the message to any who might hear. Do not return. Do not open the vault beneath the ice. Do not believe that Earth is still your home, because we watched it fall, and we are the last to remember. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.